There are many courses now are giving to young women when they are graduated, especially teachers working in special areas and there's poverty, to encourage them and see this kind of weddings as very highly recommended religiously and accepted religiously. So if you have the blessing of religion to do something, why care about other human beings anyway? You are protected by God and by the religion and all. So this is obviously, I mean, the regime itself was trying to do something about it, but they only paying under a welfare system. In Iraq, we had the best welfare system regarding widows and orphans before, not out of maybe the kind heart of the Saddam's regime, but because they were like wives of martyrs, they considered to be. And they were paid very good payment and sufficient for them to live with dignity, people like that, and offer jobs and something. Now we only have out of the 1 million widows and rest something like, I think 30,000 women registered for a welfare, and they've been seen qualified because they are differentiating now whether you are widow before the occupation or after the occupation. So if you were before the occupation, you are not entitled. If you are after, so you are our widow, and we can do something, or a lot of little things which can adjust or not adjust, and corruption goes with it, and thing. I'll come about, this is socially affecting women. Obviously, women in most societies cannot compete as much as with men. So when there is a high percentage of unemployment, women are the first to be pushed aside. And that's happened of jobs. They've been pushed aside and thing. It's the most horrendous thing is about women detainees. Women have been detained for any reason, because we have there is a terrorist act established, because we are part of the war on terror. So the terrorist act can really, you can arrest anyone under this crime or accusations for any reason, and with the informants, secret informants. So if I have a problem with you about a land or a house, or even I loved you and you don't exchange, I can go and say, well, there's terrorist things and happening. You'll be detained. But mainly women are detained because of their men in the family, not necessarily a husband. They are taking hostages. So they are waiting, the security forces, for the men. And that happens during the resistance against the occupation. It's a huge number of women were arrested. So waiting for the husbands to, the brother, the father, to surrender. And usually when they detain women, they leave a note on the door, a message to the husband or whoever they are seeking to arrest, until they come. And they could be months, could be years, could be that the man could be dead anyway or killed, and they remain there. Women also been arrested for being terrorists, and in some cases for being potential terrorists. So it's kind of a preemptive. We don't know how it's a potential terrorist, but there is. The treatment in prisons, all of them, proved to be genderly equal. So what is known in various conflicts and war zones, that women are the first victims to be, as for being sexually abused or raped. Thanks God for U.S. delivery in Iraq and the British as well. We have gender equality now regarding sexual abuse and rape. Men and women are raped. They have been raped by the Americans, by the British, and I'll come to tell you the story behind that. And also by the proxy regime. And there is a quote by the Washington Post, which I keep as reference, is I'll tell you, I mean, it's about, let me see, what kind of the torture they are objected to. I talked about the British using sexual violence and all. And at the moment, there are 22 cases of ex-detainees in the courts in Britain against the British Army. I've been to some small extent, I've been really working on that and helping a little bit, but there is a fantastic firm of lawyers, international lawyers, who found a loophole in the law, and they're working on that.
I think explain the difference between the British and the Americans.
Oh, there is, because the Americans, it's very difficult to prove anything because they enjoyed immunity. Mostly, I mean, whether they are highly politicians, soldiers, the mercenaries, even covering mercenaries, which is private contractors, security forces, all of them, they enjoyed. Bush issued a law before the war for all of them to enjoy immunity. While in the British cases, with this is proved to be, there is a case against the British Army and the lawyer working on it. Already there is a winning 2-3 cases. So there is hope for the rest, I mean, to establish kind of justice about this. But this is part of this is lawyers acting on behalf of former detainees say, this is their statement, the UK detention practices between 2003 and 2008 included unlawful killings, beatings, hooding, sleep deprivation, forced nudity, and sexual humiliation, sometimes involving women and children. The abuses were endemic, as the detainees' lawyer saying, arising from, I quote, systems management's culture and training of the British military. So when the British forces and the military and the US forces were there and they were training the Iraqis, and by the way, it's called training on human rights. The funny thing is the title of it. If you look at it as training on human rights, I mean the most shocking aspect of it, they being trained by the British and the Americans, and whenever they wanted someone to be interrogated at the certain stage of the occupation, they used to hand them over to the Iraqis to carry on the torture and interrogation. So they've been given the green light to do what you like, to do whatever you think is necessary, and everything is happening with impunity. No one has been held responsible, no one has been held accountable until now. I mean, it's rarely, except for this case, is in this, and there are other 2 cases in America, but that was about the burning of a girl after raping her. It's a famous, the 11 years old Abir, who was raped and killed, and this came because the photos appeared of the whole thing and this. So on a legal ground, this is a big step for Iraqis to work on, and for international community and international law, hopefully, whatever that is, we working on it. I talked about also, and I think this is important because this is setting the future for any kind of work. I am immensely, my efforts, most of it is working on human rights for maybe personal reason, maybe selfishness, I don't know. But I think we've been living long time with undemocratic governments in Iraq, and torture is not strange to us. We've seen torture under the previous regime, no deny about that. But many people were expecting something better after liberation and coming of the civilized Americans and the British. Wrongly so, of course. I mean, the shock and awe, which described by the bombardment, Rumsfeld described it or named it the shock and awe. In fact, it was and still is the torture practice and the creativity of what they're doing, which never been practiced even under Saddam's regime. Though it was described by all that is the dark room of tortures and all this and that this is something new. And to say about the previous regime never claimed democracy, never claimed human rights. It was openly, if when there is a political opponent to the regime, you know what you're doing and you know how you'll be dealt with. But this is different under the double standard of this. And my belief is unless we do as Iraqis and others something to put an end to that, there is no future for us on a human level. And this is going to continue for this. I'm just going to read you kind of what is a detained imam, because they're also not only targeting any ordinary women and men and all, but they are targeting religious figures in order to humiliate society, in order to humiliate the beliefs and the religion of the people. A detained imam told a delegation of Iraqi MPs, I quote, "They forced us to talk by raping us." That's he's talking about the Americans and this. Amnesty International describes a wing of Baghdad's prison where, I quote, and this is under the proxy regime, not the Americans, interrogators sodomized detainees with sticks and pistol barrels. Some young men said they had been forced to perform oral sex on interrogators and guards, and if they not confess, threatened to rape the women and girls in their families. BBC Arabic reported that death of 34 detainees within 1 week under torture. So, and the figure is an increase, all of it is this. So what the people are doing, are they just sitting there being tortured, detained, and accepting all this, and they've known for being resilient? They are like Edward Said said once, we might be mediocre people, but we are stubborn as well. So Iraqis are resisting, and they've been resisting from the day one of the occupation. And instead of receiving, as some of the Iraqi collaborators claimed and Bush repeated, that Iraq is going to receive you with flowers and sweets, they received them with hand grenades and shooting at them. And they made the Americans' life impossible in Iraq. That's why the change of plan. So instead of staying there forever with their hundreds of thousands and changing their policy of establishing themselves as and separating from there to Syria and Iran and staying in the Gulf, it's the new neo-colonial rule in Iraq and the extension of the empire in the area at its highest force. Everything changed. It's thanks for the Iraqi resistance. There were other forms of resistance. There was cultural resistance, people writing, the poetry, the meetings, having independent civil society organizations risking their lives, women risking their lives, working with the resistance as well. There is the peaceful resistance, and peaceful resistance, the best example of it. And I think, contrary to many who they might, I think, believe that they think the Arab Spring started in Tunisia and started in Egypt. Actually, the real spring started in Iraq. And the first of the demonstrations were in Fallujah. And Fallujah is a city west of Baghdad. And this is a place where initially they did not resist the occupation. On the contrary, it was one of the few places they just handed over the city to the Americans, and they walked in. They say, we want to keep our families alive. We know how to deal with you, and we deal with you, negotiating. And they did it. Elderly of the society, the community there, they dealt with that. They met the commanders in April 2003, and they reached a settlement with them. But then, they occupied the schools, the military. They occupied hospitals. They started to extend what they're doing, whatever they want to do is to be a real control of the city, control the life of the people. It seems like it's not enough for them to just stay there. So there was a demonstration in April of people, small number of people, demonstrating in front of the school. It's called Al-Qaeda School, primary school, asking the military to leave the school so that our kids will go back to studying. They were immediately shot at. 17 people were killed, among them children. The second day, 3 days after, there was a big demonstration in the city because they demanding justice for the people who've been killed. Again, they were shot at. And everything being captured by photos. Many people were killed. And that was how it started in Fallujah. This peaceful demonstration asking for the opening of a school, it went like a fire in the city, in other cities, in Najaf, in Karbala, and everywhere in Iraq. But the price again was very high. It was faced by the biggest American attack since Vietnam. That peaceful small city of 100,000 people, Fallujah, 70% of the city was demolished. Women were taking some of them out, others they refused to leave, so they were killed. And people, they buried their dead in the gardens because they couldn't dare go, and the dogs eating bodies of young people, young men in the streets. And it's all being captured on films and things. The US and the British, and by the help of a proxy Iraqi government, they used the depleted uranium, they used white phosphorus. Bodies started to melt. They didn't know why in hospital. Doctors were going mad. They don't know the reason behind it. And they used also napalm. I wrote at that time exactly because I got all the information from people there trying to reach and the outside world. I wrote a piece in The Guardian about the British using napalm in Fallujah. And I got immediately a letter the day after publishing that, from Anne Clewid. Anne Clewid, she is Tony Blair, human rights envoy on Iraq. And she said, Ms. Zangana is misleading, giving you misinformation. We did not use napalm. A group of British scientists and American scientists replied a day after saying, of course, you didn't use napalm. You did use a new generation of napalm. This is the misleading use of wording. So it was a new generation of napalm used also in addition to the depleted uranium and white phosphorus in Fallujah. And that is what was melting the bodies, and it's like in Vietnam that's happening. So it's... Of course, there are demonstrations in Iraq continuously, vigils, and there is a continuous one in 5 of the provinces since December last year, continuing until now. This is the biggest ever. Thousands of people are taking part in these vigils and demonstrations, and twice they've been shot at. Again in Fallujah, they were shot at, and 20 people were killed by the security forces. They killed them. And the second shooting, which happened 2 months ago, was in Huwayja. And this is up in the north of Baghdad, where there were camps for the vigils, like any peaceful camp. and they were surrounded by the security forces at midnight, and they were given like a couple of hours after midnight to leave the camps. The people refused, they wanted to stay, and they said, we're not leaving. This is our right, it's there in the Constitution, this is a peaceful vigil, and we're staying. So 4 o'clock in the morning, they were shot at by the army, the security forces. 85 people were killed. Many were injured, and they demolished the place. Yet they are starting somewhere else and somewhere else, and it's continuous. So Iraqis are not giving up, and the demand is, the main demand since December last year is to release women from prison. The figure given is like around 5,000 women detainees, and there are reports by some of the MPs themselves talking about the horrendous situation they are kept under. The other demand is to abolish this terrorist act where people are detained under. And there are over 40 reasons, or what's called crimes, where you can be easily sentenced to death in Iraq now. That means anything. You can be sentenced to death. And 10 days ago, 43 Iraqis were executed. The United Nations Human Rights Council spokeswoman describes that as obscene and inhuman. That's it. So we got the information there and all of it. And the third is to change this sectarian government, put an end to sectarianism, to the corruption and all. And as time passing, the ceiling of the demand is increasing. What started as just asking for the release of women became now to get rid of the regime altogether. We can't really live with this anymore, and there are alternatives and things like that. What I wanted to show you is
Hey, do you want candy? I don't have any candy. You want a hand grenade?
The Marines are taking Fallujah one house and one street at a time. How to distinguish between the civilians that remain and the insurgents, and given all the advance warning we've seen of this battle, why would the insurgents have remained? Who would have remained?
As far as the civilians are concerned, my impression is that most, in fact, have left. But once we go in there, we have to be very careful not to hesitate. This is not the time to be too careful, because the opportunity for unnecessary casualties on our side, as Admiral Turner has pointed out, I think is substantial.
well, this is it's about on the 10 years occasion or anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, I was asked by The Guardian to write a piece. And I said, well, we are a group of women called Tadamun or Solidarity. We just produced a CD, which is something new for me to work on. I usually write, but not being a pop star producer or CDs. But this CD is, it's called "And Peace Upon You of Fallujah." It tells the story of Fallujah, but by way of poetry, classical Arabic poetry, by songs of resistance. There are 3 songs of resistance. pieces of Iraqi music, and also commentators. Voice, you hear the witnesses from Fallujah, commentators. Chomsky is talking about the depleted uranium. So it's an audio collage altogether. And when the Guardian asked me, I said, can you have a look at this, what we produce? And they said, well, I got them a copy, and they said, this is fascinating. We want to take a few minutes of it, and we add to the sound of it, the songs and comments and everything. Let's have it like in a slideshow of it. And they put it there. It's proved for them a great success. And then it was on the site of the Stop the War, which they put it, and within 24 hours, they had 40,000 visitors. And they wrote to me saying, this is the first time ever we have such a number of people visiting our site.
في هذا اليوم المبارك خرجت مدينة فلوجة بشبابها وشيبها بصغارها وكبرائها معظمة لدماء الشهداء. تحتفل هذا اليوم مدينة فلوجة بحلتها القشيبة التي غسلت عار الاحتلال بدماء أبنائها وشبابها. مدينة الفلوجة التي أقضت مضاجع الأمريكان وقفة مشرفة كما وقفنا ضد احتلال العراق دفاعا عن أرض العراق. سوف ندافع عن وحدة العراق بدمائنا وأموالنا.
In Fallujah, a town in Iraq which was viciously attacked by American forces in November 2004 with all kind of horrible war crimes, they found, the doctors who investigated there found levels of cancer, leukemia, and so on. They're beyond what they found in Hiroshima. That's pretty significant. Essentially unmentioned in the U.S. But it's the kind of thing you're taught not to say and not to ask what it means.
Akram is just a day old. He was born with a cleft lip and cleft palate, and is one of many children at Fallujah's General Hospital suffering from severe birth defects.
Must have got into the air, must have got into people's bodies and into their food and their water. Most of the material is actually inside the individual parents who breathe the stuff in.